Tier lists. The easiest way to start a fight on the internet. It's simple content based entirely on opinions, something that can differ vastly between people on essentially any topic. Ranging from the most serious to most ridiculous, they're a video format that is well and truly timeless. With Pokémon Champions having recently released, we have 23 new megas to try out for the first time in draft. So today, let's rank every single one of them on a tier list, based on my early and somewhat ill-informed opinions. This is coming from the guy that tiered the Smart Draft Kickoff Tour though, so it's safe to say, take these with a grain of salt. So for our tiers here, we have Not Looking Good Brev, aka this is the bottom tier and the ones that'll hardly get any use. Might be viable, as in it could be good, could be not good. Kinda shiced, because kinda shiced could be pretty fire. Top tier, self-explanatory, and Banhammer, which will come into play in this video. So here I have the 23 megas that were introduced in Legends EA that are currently in Pokémon Champions that we have all the information for. I'm going to do them in dex order because it is so much easier to do it that way, and it's just a nice way to build a tier list. So let's get cracking on Mega Clefable. Mega Clefable is an interesting case because you look at these stats and you think this thing can't be that bad. Even if the distribution isn't quite the way we'd like, we probably want a little bit more into that Phys Def if we could design it ourselves rather than the 40 points of special attack. But let's be real, we'd also not make it a flying type. So don't really know what to say here. Magic Bounce is cool. There was a point where it looked like it was going to be Misty Surge, which would have been both funny and also sad. But Magic Bounce is quite nice because it is essentially the same ideas that you get with Magic Guard, except you also cover yourself with things like Taunt, Encore, which means as a setup threat, this thing is pretty good. You still have access to Calm Mind, which is wonderful. You still have access to Cosmic Power, which is great. And you have all the coverage you wanted. Moonblast. Like, you have Moonblast, you have Thunderbolt, obviously, Fire Blast, Shadow Ball if it comes into play. You still have Moonlight for recovery. As you know, guys, I still can't spell, so this is always a great time when it comes to me having to type on the fly. But you still have the fantastic utility that you really want here. It keeps growing. You see Encore, Endeavor if you want to be that guy. Healing Wish is a big one, because Healing Wish is always great. And I think in a metagame like Champions, which looks to be pretty offensive right now, I think it is something that you're going to want. And you combine all these factors in, and Clefable should be a decent enough one. Yes, the rock weakness definitely sucks, but at least you do have Magic Guard prior to Mega Evolution, so you can make sure that you can avoid that as long as possible. And Clef is going to work in similar ways to mons like Mega Slowbro, or even Mega Audino back in the day used to work, where you don't Mega Evolve for quite a while, and you only Mega Evolve when the time is right. And I think that's very relevant for Clef here. So I'm going to go ahead and put this thing in Chist, because I think this mod's going to be pretty good. Although, there is a fair few structures where it's not quite going to work, and we'll get into that when we get to the other top tier megas, because realistically, there's only 3 round 1 mons that this can go with. Those being Dragapult, Meowscarada, and Garchomp. And those sort of ideas are going to come up a hell of a lot in this video, because that is the way that they are looking right now. It seems as though they are the 3 mons you need to work with if you are not a top tier mega. So you will be hearing a lot from me in terms of those. I do think Mega Clef is pretty good, but definitely could have been better. Mega Clef, pretty good, works quite well with Dragapult and Meowscarada, and let's see what it does in proper events. Mega Victory Bell is a mon of all time. Innards Out is an interesting ability, which for those that don't really know how it works, it effectively uses the damage as recoil that you take from an attack. Kyukamuku was quite an annoying one with it, although it mostly ran unaware in some metagames. This thing has still some fantastic options that it always had. You have Clear Smog, you have Knockoff, you do have strong enough stabs in the form of Poison Jab, Sludge Bomb, you have everything that you want. The issue is, of course, you still have Weather Ball, but you've lost Chlorophyll, so Sun's no longer as viable. You still have Strength Sap. The defensive utility is very much there. The problem is that this is just an inferior Mega Venusaur. Especially when you look at these stats. Like, 125 attack, 135 special attack, you'd think, this thing's pretty good. Problem is, you have such a defensive ability with 80, 85, 95 as your bulk, which is nothing too crazy, but it's still relatively okay. I'm still not sure about Innards Out's ability, and I think if it did have some other options, it could have been a lot better. 70 speed tier is an okay speed tier. It's not great in this metagame because you're not quite slow enough for things like Trick Room. You also have no way to boost your own speed, which you will miss out on with Chlorophyll, unless you want to draft it with Sun so you have Chlorophyll prior to Mega Evolution. Yes, you still have access to stuff like Sword Stance and Growth, and there is some times where it's going to be nice, especially now that it's Taku's place, which is kind of cool. But I think unfortunately this is our first entry into It's Not Looking Good Brev. And that's just because there's so many good megas that I think there's just a lot that outclass it. Especially when it is an 8-man metagame where I think a lot of these megas have to get taken, as well as you obviously have the old megas that are still pretty damn good. So, Victory Bell, a victim of the way that the format is right now, and honestly, it's just a couple tools away from being pretty good. But it didn't, so it can only end up here. Mega Starmie was a bit of an evil demon that we've known has been coming in the pipeline ever since Legends EA's release, but we didn't quite realize how good it would actually be. Yes, these stats are fantastic. You have a lot of bulk, 120 speed is super nice, and then you combine that with your 100 attack with huge power, and you have a problem. I did say in a video that I did as part of the Road to Champions series, which if you haven't seen, check it out, I'll leave it in the card or description or something, I'll leave it somewhere, is that I did think this thing was going to get banned eventually. I was wrong. This thing is going to get banned quite quickly, I would say. The problem is with this metagame is nothing really is capable of dealing with it. And the stuff that might be capable of preventing it, you still have rapid spin to boost your own speed, and if you need to go a bit faster, you still have agility. And you have the bulk up sets, which are fantastic. You can just flip turn out on everything, because, spoiler alert, there's no Rocky Helmet in this game. So you can just flip turn for free with 0 drawbacks. You still have all the fantastic special coverage that you had to be able to snipe off any bulk you want that might be a problem. The one that comes to mind being Thunderbolt for something like Gyarados, which could be used to check the physical variations of Mega Starmie. You have so many fantastic options, and with that stat distribution, this thing is an absolute monster. And we've seen that with these speed tours. I did say this thing was going to get banned, but I thought it would last a bit longer. Nope, straight in the ban hammer, it's coming. This thing will be gone sooner rather than later. I'm not even sure it's going to be playable in DPL, which, obviously, Mega Starmie is a hilarious boy, but good god is it far too good for this format. Mega Dragonite's a pretty easy one when it comes to dividing opinion. And the reason for that is the stats are nuts, because you have 145 special attack, you have a 91, 115, 125, and you get the speed increase to 100, which seems super beneficial. The issue is it lost attack with its Mega Evolution, and that just doesn't quite sit right when what we're so used to is the Dragon Dance sets, which are obviously very good in Gen 9. The problem that this one has is, well, yes, it does have great special coverage because it gets Hurricane, it gets Draco Meteor, it has like all the electric stuff, fire stuff, it even gets Hydro Pump. This thing is great, and it can run agility for its own speed for the special sets as well, and the utility is just as good as ever, even if it did lose Encore, which is a bit of a sad one. The problem with this thing is it gets multi-scale. And with multi-scale, it just doesn't quite work as well, because obviously, 1, you know how to do its boost in the game, 2, this is a Mega, so you have to draft this with really, really good hazard removal, which isn't that potent in the game, because the best one is a Mega, as I just talked about with Mega Starmie, even though that thing doesn't really want to click Rapid Spin. So it's just a really awkward dynamic when it comes to this thing. So it's just hard to really know what to think. We've seen limited usage of it, and it seems fine, but especially when 2 of the big 3 that don't get Megas round 1 are Dragapult as well as Garchomp, this thing has a very hard time because it's fighting with multiple things to be the Meowscarada partner, which I'll get into later. I still think this Mon is too good from a raw basis to not put anywhere else but top tier, but it definitely is one that could divide opinion. And I feel like we're not going to see how good it is until later down the line when we have more stuff. As of right now, you'll see it sometimes, not super often, but it's still pretty good in the right circumstances. Speaking of dividing opinion, we have Mega Meganium, and this is a Mon that we really don't know what to think. Going into it, after the reveal of Mega Soul's ability, this thing seems though it was going to be super good, as I talked about, because you get access to Solar Beam, you have 66% recovery on Synthesis, you get Weather Ball with boosting. Unfortunately, you did not get Growth, which probably would have made it too good. And you still have fantastic utility across the board, because you still get access to Encore, you still have access to Knockoff, you have that stronger one as I said, you have Counter if you want to be that guy. You get Screens if you want to be that guy. You have SD sets, even though, when it comes to its stats, that 143 special attack stat better be getting used. I think a big issue that it has is 1, no access to Moblast, and 2, Grass Fairy just isn't that good at typing. We've seen it get O-code by things that you'd realistically think with this bulk, it shouldn't get O-code often, but it is getting O-code quite a bit. And could be very good in the right circumstances, especially on Dragapult teams, seems to be the main one as of now. But I still think that this is just one of those that is a case of what could have been. It's very close to being incredibly good, but it's just missing a few key tools and maybe a slightly better typing, or like maybe a little bit more speed. It's hard to know what you could. It's great that this thing is actually in this debate given where Meganium was. Although, Meganium did get some use in Gen 9 as a cheat grass to check stuff like Overpower, Wellspring, and Palafin. So, I'm going to put this thing into Kinda Shiest. I think this is definitely Kinda Shiest and will be one of the top tiers. One of the top ones when it comes to this Kinda Shiest tier. Spoiler alert. But it's not quite that top tier level because there's just too much stuff that can do too much damage to it. Which, you know, still an incredibly cool mega and still an incredibly fun one to try out if you plan to in any sort of draft league coming up. But I think it can't get any higher than here for now. Another mod that I've already talked about, and my opinions haven't really changed on Mega Feraligatr since the reveal of Dragonize as an ability, because there's not a lot that has changed. It's still going to be relying on Double Edge, which hits very, very hard. You do have Sword Sense, you do have Agility, you do have Dragon Dance, you have options. And with these stats, that physical bulk means you can set up in a lot of cases. And with how good screens are, even though there is no light clay in this game, it does mean that you can get into a lot of good situations to get the setup off. The problem is the speed stat, as I've said, because at +1 speed, you do not outspeed a Dragapult. Actually, you might speed tie it at level 50. I know you don't at 100. It's close though, but when you're not quite hitting that, and you do have Scarfers that are quite scary, but at the same time, you don't have a typing that's really abusable. This does have the same issue as Dragonite though, because Dragapult and Garchomp are 2 of the 3 best non-megas in the format, which means that it's another one that's fighting for those Meowscarada teams, which is unfortunate, because this thing is definitely not at the level of Dragonite. And there's not a whole lot more that I can say. Cool defensive utility too if you want to be that person, because at the end of the day, its typing is quite nice. I'm going to stick this thing in Kinda Shiest, because it is Kinda Shiest, but I do think compared to the 2 that we've already said, it's just not quite at the level. Still could be pretty good if you have it in the right situations and you team build well, but, you know, I think you can do better things with your Meowscarada builds when it comes to this metagame. This one pains me, folks, because Mega Skarmory had so much potential to be so good, because you had the speed, you have the bulk, you have the coverage that you need. All it needed was a decent ability. It got bloody Stalwart, which is useless in singles. Cool for VGC in terms of ignoring redirection. I'd say in VGC leagues it might get some use, but in singles it's so unfortunate. This could have been so good, because you have SD, you have weak armor prior to Mega, you can still run the Iron Defense Body Press sets, you can set up spikes with this thing and roost up and be annoying. And like I said, you have Brave Break, you have Drill Run to hit these steel types. This thing has a lot of the options that it wants, especially when you combine it with the fact that it's 140 base attack with 110 speed. That is pretty damn good, especially with the typing, because we're so used to the Steel Flyings being defensive, but we saw that with Offensive Sally in Usum. It was so good, because it could just automize up and win, except this thing's even faster, stronger, well, it doesn't quite Beast Boost, and has slightly more options, because, you know, its coverage is fairly underrated. Unfortunately, Stalwart does peel it back from being the top tier. And while I do think it is still pretty good, it unfortunately can only get into Kinda Shiest. Although, I know I might have just said Meganium was top of Kinda Shiest, this is actually top of Kinda Shiest, because this thing could have been top tier so easily. But even without a useless ability, it still has all the options it wants. So, I think this is a really cool one to put on your teams. Do try it out, because it has all the stuff it could want, and for something like Draft, that's pretty damn effective. Skarm is a Skarm, and regular Skarm is still also great in this format, because, spoiler alert, there's not a ton of great steals. And that's just good. So, use Mega Skarm, kids. You won't regret it, even if its ability is absolutely useless. Speaking of mons I put on my Megas I'm hyped for video, we have Mega Chimecho. And I still think this thing is good. The issue is, with the way the Champions metagame is right now, it is incredibly aggressive. And this was not going to be the Mega that survived the hyper-aggressive metagames. Because yes, 75, 110, 120 is great, it's just not quite good enough right now when everything is throwing offense at you and you need those speeds from your Megas because the speed outside of Megas is kind of underwhelming. So you don't really want to be using your Mega on a glorified Bronzong essentially. This still has all the fantastic tools. You still have Psychic Noise, you can still Healing Witch, you can heal Bell still in this game, which is a rarity. You have Baton Pass access, you can still run the Calm Mindsets because you have all those options. Psychic Noise is fantastic, like I said. You have Taunt, you have Thunder Wave, you have Yawn, you can Wish Up. This thing has so many options that it wants, and I do think that when the metagame calms down a little bit and maybe gives us more options, it becomes a little bit more useful for bulk, this thing becomes a lot better. Unfortunately, Chimecho can only go into the might be viable section for now, but if we come back to this in a year, where maybe we have like a couple hundred more Mons, speed doesn't feel as cope, this thing could be pretty damn good. Mega Frostlass is sick. There is not much else really to say about it. Snow Warning helps so much because of obviously the buff, which means that it can boost its own defense, meaning these stats look fantastic. 70 defense, well doubled, 100 speed F, 140 special attack, 120 speed. The 120 speed tier is pretty crowded in this game when you realize it, but it also gives you strong blizzards, which is really nice, especially since this mod doesn't get freeze dried. You have access to Shadow Ball as well for your own stab, and you still have T-Bolt to be able to hit the water types. Now with the newly added Nasty Plot, which is huge, meaning that it can just kind of break its way through everything. You combine that with the fact that it gets access to Aurora Veil, as you can see here, meaning it can set up screens, because of its ability obviously, and you even have stuff like Draining Kiss to be able to hit the dark types, which some Nasty Plot sets could really benefit from. You also still have access to Will-O-Wisp and Hex sets, you have access to Spikes, which means that this thing can be incredibly versatile with its movesets. You still get Taunt, you still have just a lot of different options, which are really nice to have. Even if Imprisoned to get around other Shadow Ball mods, which would be pretty cool to see. And even the physical move pool isn't really lacking, which I know 80 attack isn't ideal, no buff compared to its regular counterpart, but you do still have stuff like Ice Shard, which could be nice for picking off some mons. I do think Mega Frostlass can't go anywhere else other than top tier. I'm actually going to put it above Dragonite, which I think some people might disagree with, but I think Frostlass is a lot easier to put on some teams compared to Dragonite. I think it pairs really well with a lot of stuff, and even in its own right, it's just a fantastic mod. Should be really interesting to see how this thing does. It's been doing fantastically in VGC, and I feel like in Draft, that's not going to change. So let's see what happens when people actually start prepping with this thing, and we see all the options that it actually has. We've talked about Mega Emperor already, and how disappointing Moldbreaker is in ability when the other two got new abilities, but there's still some saving grace with this mod, or at least there can be. Because you bulk up sets with Close Combat, Drain Punch, you still have relatively good fat, and you still have a lot of fantastic coverage due to your access to stuff like Earthquake. You have Knockoff, you have Heavy Slam to deal with the Fairy type to be annoying. You have Rock coverage to be able to deal with Pokemon Fire type. You have a lot of options, and even utility, you're doing pretty okay for yourself due to access to stuff like Roar, you have Taunt, Yawn. Like, it still does relatively okay when it comes to that stuff. And obviously, like I said, you can set up. The issue here obviously is 75 defense. 75 speed isn't actually that bad. 75 defense is unfortunate, because with this typing, you would want that hell of a lot more physical bulk, which means you're going to want to get a little bulk ups on. But with your speed, there's not that many situations where you can get bulk up off. I do think that this thing, in its own right, isn't that bad of a mod. It does have the tools, and on paper could be pretty nice in that cheaper Mega slot, which we've seen in some of the other games. I think I am going to unfortunately be a little bit harsh. I'm going to put it at the top of this, and there is a bit of a reason for that. I just find it really difficult to say to take this thing when Infernape's obviously in the game and it doesn't take up your Mega slot, and there's so many just really prevalent Mega slot on, particularly when it comes to both fire types as well as fighting types. Because at the end of the day, you still have the Zards, you have Delphox, which I'll get into later, you have Chestnut, that I'll get into later, you have Galeta Metachamp. So there's just too many mons that I think are better than this thing, where it could maybe be viable, but I think because of the alternatives just being better, I think I have to stick with this one too. Sorry Embor and Embor fans, but you might surprise me later down the line. Mega Excadrill has an interesting problem, and that is that its regular mon might be better in this metagame, and that's because of its fantastic abilities, because Sandrush is great at all times, and Mold Breaker is also fantastic when you have the Rotoms in this game. Although, saying that, Piercing Drill is still okay. Although the main cases where you would get around Protect don't really exist in this game, especially since there was a few months that lost Wish of relevance, main one being something like Vaporeon. But you look at these stats, 165 attack, 103 speed, and you also have 110-100 bulk, is pretty nice. Especially since, you can just click SD and Rapid Spin for your own speed boost. Rest in peace, Agility Excadrill. Stuck in Legend ZA. What it didn't lose from ZA was its access to Mega Horn, which, that is big. That gives it something to actually have a really strong hit on bulky grass types, which Excadrill can struggle with at times. Even though, Poison Jab is fine, it just doesn't quite do enough damage to some of them. So Mega Horn to get that added oomph seems really nice. And, you still have your rock coverage. Rock Slide is your best bet of healing something like Corviknight. You do have 40% at plus outright, which is not bad from an anime Excadrill. And at the end of the day, you can still get Sword Stances up at that stage, and you're still pretty alright mon with all the stuff that Excadrill does. And you can also still draft it on stuff like Tyranitar teams, abuse Sandrush, and then just Mega Evolve when you have to. I think this thing definitely does go into kind of Shiest, but I think this is quite a flexible tier, so I'm going to stick it between Meganium and Clefable. I think Excadrill will definitely be more expensive than Clefable because of the natural disparity between the two mons, and they wouldn't want to make Excadrill too cheap, but I do think Meganium might do slightly more. But, there's a lack of steel types in this game, so I do think Mega Excadrill is certainly going to get some usage. Mega Chandelure. What could have been? This thing still has all the great stuff that Chandelure does, because at the end of the day, you have strong Fire Blast, you have strong Shadow Ball, and you still have access to stuff like Calm Mind, you get Haze, because for some reason this thing can Haze, and the other big thing that it kind of is going to need is Flame Charge, because Chandelure ran Scarved often, and when you do look at 90 speed, it does need that speed boost to get over some stuff. 175 at special attack is really strong, and 110 defenses both sides is pretty solid. The thing is, 90 speed is just not fast enough in this game. So you have to rely on a mon that is going to switch in and take rocks, and then get the Flame Charge up. Infiltrator's just not good enough. Magic Guard would have been cool. Shadow Tag, like it used to have back in the day before they got rid of it through Dream World. That would have been sick. And while yes, I still think that this thing can be usable at times, because at the end of the day, that bulk and that special attack, you get it in the right situations, it's going to punch some holes, because that's what Chandelure does. It's done that since Gen 6 draft, although you never see it anymore. I am going to give this thing the benefit of the doubt, and I'm going to stick it in low might be viable. I think it's a slightly more unique case compared to Embor, and I could definitely be proven wrong and these two swap around in the future, but I do think there's a world where people do attempt to draft Mega Chandelure for a cheap enough price, and it pops off. Or as Mega Banette has worked at times, so surely you could see a Mega Chandelure work at some point. The issue for it is, of course, there's 90-something Megas in this game, so if it's not going to get usage now, I don't think it's ever really going to get usage. But, only time will tell, I guess. Mega Golurk, once upon a time, had adaptability in Legend ZA Pet Mod, and this thing could have been absolutely unbelievable, because the combination of Poltergeist plus EQ, if you had adaptability, good god, it does a lot of damage, especially on Trick Room builds. And, of course, it did have Rot Polish in that game, which it doesn't have anymore, which is unfortunate. Mega Golurk, though, still pretty okay. Got Unseen Fist, which to me is a bit weird, especially since it's now nerfed to 25%, but it can still use it, thankfully, a little bit, since it gets access to Headlong Rush now, which, is cool for Trick Room teams. The problem is it doesn't get Ghost Stab that can actually utilize it, so you're relying a lot on Elemental Punching and stuff, which is a little bit annoying. The stats are still great though. Still 159 attack, 105 both sides, 89 HP. You can take a bunch of hits and good god you can deal damage back, even if you don't have adaptability. But this thing is just not quite what it was. But you do think about it. I know I've mentioned steel types enough in this video, but ground types aren't much better. I still think that this thing is not going to be great though, because at the end of the day, it's just very hard to fit on seams, and it doesn't even utilize its ability that well. I'm going to stick it in not looking good, Brev. I think there is a chance it maybe gets some usage, but why would you use this thing over something like Mega Banette? And even Mega Banette is not that good. You're better off using other Megas, you're better off using other ground types, but it might fit in the right team. Like I said, a lot of these mons do end up kind of fitting on the Masquerada style builds, but I think there's many options I would go for right now before I would commit to Mega Golem. Did Mega Chestnut keep bulletproof? Yes. Are the stats absolutely ridiculous? Yes. Does it still have all of the great coverage that it did? Yes. So what's the problem with this thing? Well, it's not really a problem. You still have a ridiculously strong body press, which you can iron defense. You still get spikes. You still get roar. You still have spiky shield, because that's a thing that exists. You still have the fantastic coverage in, like, you have access to Earthquake, you have access to Gyro Ball, Knockoff, Poison Jab if you want to be that guy. You have Bulk Up as well as Curse, as well as Belly Drum if you want to be that person. And overall, this thing just has a lot of good options. But the issue that it might have is the typing again. Grass Fighting, it's just not good. And it wasn't really ever going to get out of it. But with these stats, it can live the odd flying hit, but not a lot of them, which just makes it very preppable in a draft league format. You combine that with the fact that it's weak to a lot of very common things, and its defensive prowess can only hold up for so long. I do think, though, that this mon might be viable, and might have the same issue as Chimecho, where it gets better later on as there's more mons, and the game maybe isn't quite as Aegeo-centric, meaning that its bulk can really shine later on. It is one to keep an eye on, though, because I think it could be quite good as a cheap Mega on the Garchomp and Dragon Ball type builds, or just some other cooks. So I'm interested to see what people think and come up with when it comes to this mod. This thing, probably the biggest winner in terms of Megas, because you have fantastic stats because of 134, 159, 125. That last bit of the stat sheet is ridiculous, but you get Levitate, meaning you get a ground immunity. I'm sorry, VGC people that wanted to spam Expanding Force with this thing, but Levitate is fantastic because it gives you a ground immunity. It also gives you an immunity to Spikes and Sticky Web, which is also nice when removal kind of sucks. And Delphox has always had a ton of tools, and it got a ton of tools in Gen 8, which is kind of underappreciated because you don't see a Delphox. You get Agility, you have Calm Mind, you have Encore, you obviously have fantastic coverage. Well, I say fantastic, all you really need is your dual stabs as well as access to Focus Blast and Grass Knot, and you're really in the clear. And you also have Scorching Sands for stuff like Heatran, which obviously doesn't exist in this game. And, you know, you also have Nasty Plot for really strong. And overall, just a lot of good options, meaning this thing's going to be fantastic in draft. And that speed tier is also super unique, gets you over a bunch of mons that are very critical to get over, and it just puts you in a really nice position. This mon is 100% a round 1 mon in the Champions metagame, which, while limited as it is, I know isn't much of a crazy statement, but even as we get more and more mons back, I think this thing is definitely going to stand the test of time, because it has all the tools that it needs, and it has the raw power to really make a splash. This thing is 1,000,000% a top tier. The question is, where in this top tier? It's going above these guys for now, for sure, because it definitely is a level above Frostlass and Dragonite, but it's not bannable, and that's a good thing. We like healthy top tier Megas, because Mega Gallade needs some competition, and Mega Delphox certainly provides that. Now we get to the interesting bit. Mega Greninja. What a weird case this is. You look at this, and you see 142 speed with these attacking distributions, and keeping Protean, and you'd really think this thing is going to be crazy good. The nice thing though, it didn't keep the buffs that it got from ZA. The big one, of course, being Nasty Plot. You still have insane coverage though. It's a Greninja. I don't really need to talk about it. You have all the physical coverage you could want, as well as getting access to Flip Turn, which is nice. And you have all the special coverage that you previously had, with obviously your Sludge Wave tool coming from Gen 9, and you can just turn into a bunch of different types, and because you can have Protean twice, it means that you can do a one type change in regular form, and then mega in type change again, which is quite an interesting idea. You also have all the fantastic utility. You get access to hazards and taunt and fast haze for that person, I guess, but you have all the options you want. Greninja's problem that I thought was going to make it bannable was Battle Bond. That no longer exists, which means you're only dealing with the Protean variants, and that doesn't quite work. So, what is the consensus on Greninja? A mon that I thought was going to get banned pretty damn quickly. The thing is, I was wrong. Don't get me wrong, it is definitely a top tier, and I do think it is the second best of the new megas introduced, but it's not broken, as of right now. I think that might change when Starmie goes, because Starmie has been so central to every discussion, and maybe Gren just has a couple good events, and the roles kind of swap, where we thought that Starmie was the one who was going to survive, but instead it's Greninja. But as of right now, I can only put it here. It's round 1 mon for sure, and you can make some good teams around it, but it's not as broken as one might have thought when looking at it on paper. For the first time since forever, because we've known this mon's existed, but we can finally use Floette. Specifically, Aziz's Floette, or Eternal Flower as it's now called. But that thing got a mega as part of Legend Z, showing its importance. And this mega is pretty damn strong. Those stats are healthy, especially when you think this is not a fully evolved mon. Well, it technically is for lore reasons, but we won't talk about that part. 102 speed is a weird speed tier, but it's quite a nice speed tier for getting over some important mons. Also, speed tying Garchomp is kinda cool. 155, 148 is insane, and that physical bulk can definitely be worked with because of how weird that speed tier is. And Fairy Aura is broken. It essentially gives you a free boost on your fairy moves, and there's a reason that this ability was only seen on Xerneas. And while yes, this thing's coverage is amazing, all you really need is a strong Moonblast or a strong Light of Ruin, because this move exists. Although you probably do just kill yourself off of this, because half recoil is a lot, and this thing doesn't have a ton of HP. In terms of its special move pool, there's not a ton here. I still can't type. Because, yes, you get grass moves, you get Pollen Puff, which is kind of cool, and Psychic to hit the poisons, but steel types are an issue, and you kind of just need to chunk them. And while yes, there's very few steel types that actually beat this thing, and even less when you can run Fat Calm Mind variants, this thing is still pretty damn good, but maybe not quite at the same level of the previous two that I discussed. And I'm just going to reflect that perfectly by landing it right in the middle of Delphox and Frostlass. This thing I do think is a late round 1 mon, maybe early round 2, depending on your preference. It, I think, is far too good to be getting back to the Meowscarada Dragon Ball teams, but, you know, this thing could still have its problems. It needs to join its time now, because I think as more mons get introduced, this thing will not be as good as the metagame gets faster and bulkier and gets more steel types that are pretty viable, and more megas that I think could outshine it. But it is kind of nice to see a mon like Floette, which you wouldn't expect to be this good, to be this good. So let's see how this develops, and we'll see how long it lasts, shall we? Getting into discount Mega Alakazam here, we have Mega Meowstic, and oh my god, this thing could have been so good. This thing was talked about for so long as having Psychic Surge, and it was so exciting, and it got so many cool tools in ZA, and then none of that turned out to be true. It lost all of its cool tools, which means it no longer had Moonblast, or Earth Power, or any of the hazards, or Parting Shot, all of which sucks. And it got Trace instead, meaning it is literally just Butter Mega Alakazam, although I think it's technically slightly bulkier prior to Mega Evolving. The stats are interesting. 124 speed is an interesting speed tier. 143 is strong, and at the end of the day, you do still have access to a strong Psychic, you have a Learning Voice for Dark types, and you do get Nasty Plot. And as I've already said, the Steel types aren't that great. The issue though is that there is a Mega that exists that is faster, stronger, and can hit Steel types because it's also a Fire type, and that's Mega Delphox, as we've already discussed. So it's hard to know where this thing's really going to fit. I am going to give this thing the benefit of the doubt and stick it into Might Be Viable, but I'm going to stick it at the bottom of Might Be Viable. Realistically, this thing is not as good as the other Psychic type Megas existing because you have Delphox, you have Medicham, and you have Gallade, and I think they're all better fits on a lot of teams. Maybe this thing is like a cheap Mega can get development a little bit later if it's priced at a competitive range, but it's really difficult to see. I realistically could have swapped Meowstic and Emboar here. They were quite close, but we'll leave it at that for now. But that could definitely change in the future. Mega Hawlucha is another case of a mon that I think could get better as time goes on. You still have all the fantastic options of Hawlucha, because you can SD, you can bulk up, you have access to close combat as well as bravery, you get Encore and Taunt, you can roost up, you turn out, you still have great coverage. All the things that it has is definitely going for it. And you look at the stats, the bulk is okay. At 78, 100, -3, and 137 attack is pretty strong. The problem is that it's not quite fast enough for this metagame at 118. As we've said, there's a lot of megas here that just about outspeed it. And I'm referring to the big three here of Starmie, Delphox, and Greninja. And you also have mons like Dragapult in this game that outspeed it, as well as a mon like Meowscarada that exists. And knowing that you need agility for every single one of these is a little bit of an issue. I still think that this is very much a potential mon, and could be pretty damn good, because of all the options that it has, and I've already said that I'm extremely excited for this thing, so I'm not going to back down from that opinion. I'm going to stick it might be viable, because I don't quite think it's at the case of Kinda Shiest. I think Gator is a mon that in more matchups can be polarizing, because No Guard as an ability just isn't quite as good as maybe you would have liked. But I still think this thing is certainly usable, and there's definitely teams that you can put this on and it can put in the finest of work. Really interested to see how people approach Mega Hawlucha, but I do think give it time, give it more megas introduced, and you might see this thing as a cheap alternative to some of the top tier fightings with a bunch of cool utility as well. So maybe this is just your backup to Mega Gallade if that gets snapped. Who knows? Champions has a fairly long life cycle, so it's kind of hard to know where to put these things for now, but these are just my initial thoughts, so let's go with that. Now this is a mon I did not think was going to be anywhere near as good as it actually is. Mega Crabominable is hype as hell, cool as hell, and also pretty damn good. Let's go back to those stats. 157 attack, 122 defense, 107 speed def. They are fantastic. 33 speed means that you do get good in Trick Room. You have Bulk Up. You can still run Drain Punch. You have Ice Hammer, all of which are boosted by Iron Fist. The big one though, Mop Punch. This thing getting priority is such a big deal, meaning you can run ridiculously fat, get up bulk ups, and then just go ham. You still have Gunk Shot to be able to deal with fairies. You have a bunch of other coverage that you can see here. Thunder Punch for bulky waters if you need it. This mon has options, and I think they're a really natural pairing of this thing with Galarian Slowking, a mon that gets a lot better in the Champions metagame because not as many things can just break straight through it. And if you can get the Trick Room into the Chilly Reception, this thing is a demon, because then you can just start clicking buttons or clicking setup buttons, and all works out. And I think at its price, this thing could pair really, really well on the Meowscarada teams, or even the Garchomp teams, or the Dragapult teams. It fits on all of them if you want to go that way. So this thing is 100% going into Kinda Shiest. And hot take, I'm putting it here. It nearly went above Mega Clef. I think Mega Clef does more things, but this thing I think is a lot more splashable onto teams if Galarian Slowking is still there. You can commit to it with a lot more mons, and I do think it's just a really interesting mon that's very difficult to prep for, and if you're not careful, it could snowball quite easily into a crap rave. Another mon let down by the leaks building up our hype into inevitably getting disappointed. Mega Drampa is an interesting case. Yes, the bulk is great. Yes, the speed is fine for Trick Room. So you'd think it's comparable to Crabominable, and Berserk is still cool. The problem though is it's very hard to fit this thing on teams. As I've said with the Dragon types, since the best three non-megas, two of them are Dragon types, it's so difficult to fit this one. And you still do get all the fantastic options. You can run Calm Mindsets, you get access to Glare, which is good, you get access to Roost, so you can stack up Berserk boosts, and your coverage is absolutely insane, especially because you now get stuff like Hurricane, you have Thunderbolt, Draco Meteor, you get Fire coverage, you get Fairy coverage on the physical side, which makes no sense, Shadow Ball, you have all the options you want, and it is just one of those potential mods. Can do so many things decently, it just can't do anything crazily well. So it's really hard to see this thing getting any sort of point buff. As of right now, I have to put this thing into It's Not Looking Good Breath. And I'm going to stick it below Golurk. And to be fair, I think Dramp is probably a slightly better mon than Golurk. The thing is, Golurk, due to the lack of ground types, is probably more likely to be used. It's an unfortunate state of affairs for Mega Drampa, and maybe it'll eventually find its place. Or maybe it'll eventually get Drizzle. This is a live service game now, they can change abilities whenever they want. That would be cool. But I do think this thing is just not quite up to scratch right now, and is very difficult to fit on teams. So I can't put it any higher than this. Unfortunate, because it's a cool Mega, and it's a cool design, and it does a lot of cool things, just none of them quite good enough to get any consistent form of play. Mega Scovillain is an interesting case, because you kind of need to take everything in different perspectives. You see 138 attack and special attack, and you think this thing should be pretty good offensively. The issue is its 75 base speed, which means it kind of struggles to get in on a lot of stuff, as it's hardly even outspeeding walls. Then you get the Spicy Spray. A cool ability, meaning that you can burn any mon that hits you, but you don't have the bulk to live multiple hits, because 65, 85, 85 is usable, but it's not exactly fantastic. And you still have all the options that Scovillain did, as well as newfound access to, nope, you lost that. You get stuff like Flare Blitz now, meaning the physical sets are a lot more viable than they used to be, but it still doesn't feel that good, and very difficult to use as a Mega slot. It's doing surprisingly okay for itself in VGC because the ability's good and you get Rage Powder, but you look at it from a draft perspective and you're just looking at these options. And while yes, it could do some cool stuff, are you really going to use your Mega slot on this? That's the problem. It's harsh. I'm going to put it as the worst Mega for now, because I think Victory Bell has slightly more options and its utility is relatively cool. But I'm sure someone's going to prove me wrong, probably L5. He always finds a way to get a use out of a Scovillain. But until I see that, I have my doubts. So it's down the bottom here, not looking good for poor old Scovillain. Man, could have done so many different things. Spicy Spray is such a cool idea, but the stats are just lacking to use it properly. Unfortunate, but nothing that can be done. Well, maybe something can be done, but not right now anyways. Our 23rd and final Mega for this video is one that I really changed my opinion on very, very quickly. On paper, Mega Gilmora doesn't even feel that much like an upgrade, because you look at these stats, and while yes, the bulk is nice, the fact that it got most of the investment into attack meant that you were essentially losing out on Gilmora's access to items such as Power Hurt Meteor Beam, although not in the game, or something like Resist Berry, or Red Card was another one that we commonly ran, and you're not really getting a huge amount out of it power-wise. But then adaptability came along, and adaptability changes things, because some of the calcs for Power Gem plus Sludge Wave are absolutely crazy. And since you still get access to Raw Polish, you can really just get this thing into positions where it can get a Raw Polish up and snowball. You still have all the fantastic coverage that Glim did, because Energy Ball and Earth Power are super important. So, really, this thing took a major 180 from being maybe not worth it to absolutely being worth it. The fact this can still spikes, as well as Morning Spin, is also super duper cool. So, I'm going to put this thing into top tier. I'm going to put it above Mega Dragonite. Might be a hot take, but wow, this thing is so splashable into teams. And if you get this behind screens and get the Raw Polish up, good luck stopping this thing. And, you know, you still have all the great stuff. It's still a spinner. You can still get spiky shields. And wow, Gilmora really changed my opinion there. I'm super excited to use this thing, and hopefully I get the chance to soon. And even if I don't, we're going to see some pretty cool replays with this thing. I can tell you that for free. And there you have it, folks. That is the final tier list. And that is what I think of all of the ZA Megas so far. Obviously, we're still missing 20-something of them, which I hope will come sooner rather than later, but who knows at this stage. Champions got a champion sometimes. But it's still a metagame that's playable, and that's better than nothing, I guess. If you guys do disagree with my opinions, do the typical tier list thing, and let's go fight down in the comment section. Keep it constructive though, I don't want anything to get too ridiculous around here. And if you're enjoying the kind of tier list content and want to see more, why not like and subscribe and stuff. And if you want to see more Champions content, you've come to the right place. I have a fair few ideas in the works. Anyways, I hope you all enjoy, and I shall see you in the next one, which maybe won't be Champions content. I'll let you know. Peace.